Hello everyone, and join the main stage for our first panel of the day here on day 2, how to sell into prime contractors in the space industry. So what we're going to have are invaluable insights here. There is a real appetite for some SMEs to do this. Others a little bit nervous about selling off their assets as well. So how does everybody win? We'll discuss this. We'll explore the, let's be honest, at times, rather complex procurement processes, the pitches, understanding the needs of primes from compliance and certification. We'll also look at how to build what need to be strong, trusted relationships, yes, with primes, but also the SMEs. So practical tips, how to make the most of those opportunities. You're going to be hearing from leading prime contractors, but also from SMEs and academia in this discussion. The big guys also need, the agility and niche experience of smaller guys to innovate. So it is an interesting picture. It's a very interesting competitive landscape. So please, can you give a round of applause for our panelists, who are Martin Lee of Airbus, Ben Shaw of Lockheed Martin Space, David Jones of Alphasonics, Ron Ruppersberg of MPG, and Professor John Woodward of Northumbria University. Okay, as everybody gets settled, this is where I tell you all the the stuff that happens behind the scenes. We're having a chat about the ABBA show just to warm us up. This is an informal discussion. This is where we should get to the root of things, a conversation. So again, get your apps in action. If you've got any questions that you want to be filed here, go into the session and the live Q&A and put them in and feed them to me that way. Let's start with checking the microphones are working. That's a good start. Who you are. So Martin Lee, Space Program Procurement Manager at Airbus, of course, the UK's currently largest space company. Martin.
Yeah, so I actually also within that lead the program strategy and policy for our UK national programs, but I also actually wear another couple of hats, not unusual. So I'm also the company's SME champion. And I also represent the company on a lot of the defence supplier type forum organisations with SMEs, social value, and supply chain resilience. And spend a fair bit of time at these sort of events, travelling around the country, with the opportunity, as it is great today, to meet new SMEs and start-up organisations.
You're interested in disruptive SMEs, I notice. What do you mean by that?
So disruptive technologies is really about actually doing it something different, so whether that changes the price point, the technical capability, whether it actually changes the schedule, because one of the big problems we actually do suffer in space, the time from thinking about it and to actually launch can be years, decades. I mean, in some cases we've actually had programs that have lasted 20 years before they launch, because sometimes you've got to develop the science for some of these big scientific missions, then the technology, then the equipment, and you've got to put it all together and launch it. So if we can actually find disruptive technologies that can help us reduce those long lead times, we can actually sort of get more done. And I think also it does bring the cost down, but it also brings more capacity actually into it, because we're doing it quicker, so therefore, especially the SMEs, they can get on to the next one, the next order they've actually got, rather than having years and years sort of stuck in one program. They want to get in, out, as we all know with the SME, especially as cash is king. So, we'll get into the timings and so on there. Ben Shaw, Head of Operations and Capture at Lockheed Martin Space. You've got a lot of experience in space primes, because before Lockheed you were with Raytheon as well, so you know it all.
No, I certainly don't know it all. But Ben Shaw, I've been feeling quite old now, working in the industry for over 25 years since I left the army. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, primarily in the defence world. I'm relatively new, about 4 years into the space world. But fundamentally, my background's in winning new business, delivering programs. So I'm not a supply chain expert, but I drive the demand and the output from the supply chain organisations for the business, fundamentally. So, and that's fundamentally where I come in from a program perspective.
I'm going to zip along because there is a connection here between two of our panelists, because Lockheed Martin Space have been instrumental in what could amount to a complete transformational change within the skills sector of the space industry. And it's something that's happening in the northeast of England. Can you tell us more about it?
Well, do you want me to talk about it, or do you want John to talk about it?
I want you to start, and then he's going to pick up. Yeah.
So we've made an investment with Northumbria and the UK Space Agency. You talked about the SCIF programme. It was part of the SCIF funding yesterday. It's called the North East Space Skills and Technology Centre, NEST. I'll let John go through a bit more of the details, but fundamentally what we're seeing here, and I think you might hear from some of our other panels as well, is that when we look at the risk profiles of our customers, of government, are changing. They're becoming far more risk averse, which is driving us as primes to taking far more off-the-shelf products. So then if you're a technology provider or a small and medium-sized enterprise, where do you go to go and get your products qualified up into the space world? And part of the NEST, although we talk about skills, it's also, there's test facilities in there. And that's part of what NEST is about, is allowing companies to come in and start to move up the TRL levels where they can start to test, because there is a lack of test facilities and infrastructure for that's addressable for micro, small and medium-sized and start-up companies as well, in order to qualify their products up the TRL levels. And that's part of what NEST is about, as well as developing the skills that we so desperately need across the board for the future, and driving high-quality research. And the Northeast, I'm going to plug the Northeast, it's a great region for research. There are 5 top universities up there, and likewise in Yorkshire as well. There's some really good centres of excellence, particularly around RF, in this region as well.
So this is a £50 million centre, as we're calling it, NEST, so the North East Space Skills and Technology Centre, and but it is for the whole of the UK. This could be an absolute game changer. You're hoping, Professor John Woodward, this NEST is going to lay lots of golden eggs, aren't you, for the industry?
Well, that would be fantastic, but it's NEST is absolutely critical to the ecosystem of the Northeast for space, but also for the UK, we hope, in that bringing a large prime into that facility to work with them allows us to develop our world-leading research, which is in everything from optical communications between satellites all the way through to astronaut health and extreme environments. But it's also about the pipeline of talent. It's about producing the workforce for the future, everything from primary school right the way through to PhDs, and integrating that with SMEs and other companies. And then it's the business-to-business links. It's providing opportunity for SMEs to come and work with the universities of the Northeast, but also with large primes, or to work by themselves and just do space readiness testing in our facilities, or development in our facilities. So it's making sure that all of that can happen to support the whole of the regional space economy and the national space economy as a piece.
Sorry, can I,
yeah,
I want to come in and say, it's not a new concept. This is something that we've taken from we know this is going to work. And you met JB last week.
I did,
at a
JB
conference.
Young. Yep.
JB is a product out of Colorado University Boulder, and they have an aerospace school there, part of the faculty. It is a world-leading facility. It produces, the alumni is something like 25 astronauts. You go in there, you go, this is high. And it provides pretty much Colorado, every large prime, small company, government tends to put a lot of their students or new hires out of CU Boulder. And this is the concept that we're looking to replicate here with the NEST.
Well, let's stay in the US, Ron. Ron Ruppersberg here, who is president of Microwave Products Group, MPG. Your work makes communications possible, Ron, basically.
Yes, thank you. Welcome. I'm glad to be here. We specialize in signal conditioning for RF communications. We're working to really make a variety of products throughout the signal conditioning chain, so that we can enhance the performance of the downstream elements of the communications. And We've been doing that for a number of years. We have a site here in York, and then we have U.S. content as well. So
it's wide-reaching. And we also have David Jones here, Managing Director of Alphasonics, which makes advanced ultrasonic cleaning systems. You've been running that for more than 30 years, and you did that wonderful pivot, because it was mainly in like medical grounds, wasn't it? It was
It's taken its toll, I can tell you. but yeah, it's something we started in 1993, and in 2013 we decided to look for other markets, and one of the things we dropped onto was healthcare, where we were able to really focus in on what we do, because nothing exists, to my knowledge, to be able to measure ultrasonic cavitation. And so trying to find the holy grail of 0 nanograms of protein on surgical instruments, we were forced, because the NHS brought out a new rule in 2016, and one of the one-line statements that were in the protocol was that ultrasonics had to be validated on a regular basis. I misunderstood what they meant, and so I set about trying to design and develop a piece of equipment that could actually measure the cavitation. Because effectively, once you can measure anything, you can improve it, you can develop it, there's lots of directions you can go. And so in 2018, we actually got Mark 1 built. And that was like a eureka moment, because we can now see why our technology, on the face of it, seemed to be better than anybody else's. It's there in black and white, you can't deny it, you know, and so on the basis of that, we've moved into aerospace. We've moved into dealing with other very large principles, you know, and so
all because of a misunderstanding, David.
I'm sorry.
All because of a misunderstanding.
A misunderstanding, yeah.
So it's these little developments here. I want to bring you in on this, Martin, because obviously you're working in such a high level with, you know, a large number of employees, strategy, and so on. What is the joy of working with SMEs who, you know, have that ingenuity, whether by mistake or by design, and you can allow them to flourish?
I think, for me, one of the things, UK's got a lot of innovators. We are well known without Europe about actually being good innovators. But the joy of it actually comes is the actual collaborating. It's actually working with different organisations, different peoples, to achieve a common goal. You're developing a new technology, you're developing an equipment, but you're actually doing it together. Now, we don't actually make a lot of stuff in Airbus. We're brilliant systems architects for space systems from end to end, and we will specify the technologies and the equipments we need in it, but we don't make them, we don't design them. So we actually go out to the supply chain, and without a doubt, working with SMEs is a good way of actually doing it, because they are agile. They can actually make decisions a bit quicker than the big companies can.
Tell me about it.
So I'm a great believer in balance. So you've got to have a relationship between the prime and the small SMEs, micros, whatever, where there's this balance, that we both understand each other. We've both got our challenges. And I think just as importantly, we've both got the same customer. We're working together to fulfill a customer's requirement. And it takes different types of organisations, depending on what it is we're buying, whether we're doing development, whether we're doing an adaptation of an older equipment, but actually needs to be brought up to, you know, standards, or actually expanded.
What is the procurement process then for Airbus?
There isn't a process. Like all companies, we have a process, and we have a lot of governance and due diligence in that. We do run fair competition. within that. But it all depends what we're doing. There's all the difference between we could be buying a box that maybe an organisation, you know, MPG are already producing, so and we know them for a long time, so how we put that out to competition, it would still go out probably through some typical RFI, RFP process, and there will be a competitive down select. But then you get onto some of the real complex stuff where we've got to design the technology, and we need to get academia and maybe some SMEs with expertise and the Airbus experts all together, because that gets contracted in a totally different way than if you're buying an equipment. So we haven't got one way of doing it. We have to have multiple ways because we need multiple outcomes. And again, we need to then make sure that we've got the balance within that actually understands our challenge, our needs, the customer's needs, which we're all delivering to, but also the needs of the smaller companies and the timescales and the support they need, and how we actually collaborate together in actually doing that.
That's really interesting. I want to bring you in on this, Ron, because so if you are that trusted partner, you're that trusted supplier, they know what you can do. How does that feel then to keep having to go through this procurement process? And how do you show that you are still competitive, you're still the best person for the job?
Yeah, I think it's the competitive dynamic that makes it work. It is the fact that you have to stay on your toes, you have to stay in front of your competition, and that keeps you sharp and it keeps you pushing. One of the things that I think the primes do go to the SMEs for is that rapid technology development, the continuous maturing and advancement of the different areas that we're playing in. And so I think there's definitely a symbiotic kind of relationship there for us to be able to push ourselves faster, knowing that there's support, but that we're going to get the right opportunities where we are differentiated. You know, I think Martin brought up earlier that they're looking for disruptive technologies. We're looking for the next disruptive technology that we can bring to them, that we can show them in our portfolio, that we can continue to advance and mature. You know, we oftentimes we'll talk about internal to our company, we'll cannibalize ourselves. You know, we're working to actually take away our own business with something better, because we know that that's going to meet more of the need that our customers have, that the primes have, and we can introduce that in more domains to solve more complex problems.
And is that something that you like to hear, that kind of self-cannibalization, you know, that drive, that appetite as primes?
Well, it's sort of necessary, really, because you have to keep moving. Technology doesn't stand still. Our sort of competitors, whether it's a competitor in the market or whether it's a competitor nationally, you know, for space, they don't stand still either. So you have to keep moving and driving forward. And in that sense, we as primes also have to put our wrapper and help around the supply chain as well to help them get it right too. It is a two-way partnership. It's not something that it's just them and not us. It's actually very much we've got a responsibility through to help them, to help us, that helps the customer to drive forward on it. So it is quite symbiotic.
Does your procurement process work similar to Airbus as well? So depending on the project?
Very similar, yes.
Right.
I mean, you have a set of requirements, you identify some potential vendors, you run an acquisition process, you contract, you deliver, there is some sustainment or the contract ends, and then you start the loop again in big handfuls. It's probably time that is probably one of the biggest factors that small and medium-sized companies get a bit frustrated with us, is that our sense of timing and their sense of timing is very different.
Yeah.
From a business cycle perspective.
There's nodding. The timing. What is that like? Because you guys need to be flight of foot. With you, as Martin said, cash is king, and these guys maybe could afford to just take things a bit slower.
We deal with such a wide range of companies, and the key to it all is not having all of your eggs in one basket. We supply into the printing sector, which keeps our cash rolling. you know, quick decisions. We make the machines in 6 to 8 weeks. We get paid. Everything's good. But we're also interjecting these guys into our business model. It does have challenges. Let's make no mistake about it. However, for our aerospace customer, we supply a range of equipment, not only with ultrasonics, but also without. When we don't supply ultrasonic equipment, we are in a competitive environment where we're quoting with other companies. With the ultrasonics, we're in a pretty rarefied atmosphere in that regard, because at this point in time, nobody else can do what we do, or can guarantee to do what we do. And so I do find a little frustration, as you said, because I do feel there's a kind of disconnect between the company and the engineers that we work with. If I can give you a little example of that, and it's we built a job. It was the 4th one that we'd made. The contract was misleading in so much as we were given a cleaning protocol, which meant absolutely nothing to us, but the next sentence did, which said the machine has to be exactly the same as the 3 previous machines. So of course we made it exactly the same. FAT came, on which we were relying on a chunk of money just before Christmas, and another supplier let them down, so they pushed FAT back. 11 weeks later, we had the FAT, and we failed. Now, how do we fail when we've already made 3? And because some guy brought up a protocol, this protocol that nobody, even their own people, had seen before, even though it was stated in the contract.
And do you think, I mean, that's something that comes up in other sectors as well, and it's simply down to having large companies, lots of people.
It's a large company, and I think...
What do you do to mitigate that, though? Because it's kind of understanding these are your clients.
It's the lack of communication between departments, I think, because it's such a large organisation.
Right.
And of course, that's not just specific to this sector.
No. What would you guys say?
It shouldn't make any difference, though, because between you and your customer, you would agree a test regime for factory acceptance testing.
Yes.
And it's not acceptable on the day to then change it. Yeah, you agree what's in the factory test specification, probably a long time before you actually get there and start testing. You may do a dry run on it and tweak it and both agree it, but you shouldn't be getting to the factory acceptance test and new protocols being added. If so, then they should be warned prior to that.
Yes.
And that must be, if that was us and we pushed it out of our fault, we'd probably turn around and go, we give you a part payment against it, because we understand
to be fair,
SMEs need cash in the door to pay the salaries, to pay their suppliers as well.
To be fair, the company concerned were excellent, and they paid us. But I felt that there was a bit of resentment from the engineers because they didn't have that commercial appreciation. And the machine is still in our place, by the way.
It's still available.
It's been redesigned and remodeled to fit this new...
Well, you can just use it in the printing industry.
No, I don't think so. It's like a roundabout in the middle of the factory at the moment.
I want to pick up on that, because you both nodded when David said, don't have all your eggs in one basket. And I think there's an interesting point there about the understanding of how businesses need to function. But also, you're the big guys. Don't you want to be the priority for these companies? How do you balance that?
I would say we do, but it's actually a risk to us. If a company's got too much business with us and is relying upon any one prime, or is actually too reliant on a particular part of the sector, because the sector is growing, definitely when you look inside the UK, it's not really that big, but globally it's massive. So if you're not on the export market, you've got to be able to go and do something else. You're not going to necessarily always fill your order book with that particular space product. You either need a portfolio of products that you sell into different types of missions, different types of sectors within space, you know, because there's a broad range nowadays.
And you would completely understand that when you're dealing with the SME. You would kind of almost encourage that.
Well, we also actually look at that as well, because if they're just 100% say in the telecoms market, that you've got to actually look at their financial sustainability as well. Are you going to be here in 3 years' time when we need you to actually deliver? So it is all part of the consideration.
I think I'd sort of bring in the fact that our customers, particularly if I look into you know, some of the defence world and when you're dealing with governments, that their spending priorities change as well. So we're at the whim of our customers who may delay, you know. So there's a piece there about sort of understanding the wider picture that goes on. So having that sort of portfolio approach, I think, sort of helps the whole supply chain manage, because it means that, you know, programs delay, we're not getting paid either from our customers. That goes with it. And the other piece I'd argue about the portfolio approach from companies is that other sectors will drive innovation back into us as well. And that's, you know, by being in other markets, it drives thoughts, ideas, and it adds innovation into the company, which makes it more attractive in that sort of sense, because it's delivering new ideas. But to have a company, you know, of that size, so focused on a particular space market or defence market, could be seen as pretty financially quite risky for them. So completely on board.
Interesting stuff. And I think bringing up the realm of politics, I'm going to turn to you, Professor John Woodward, because you've been dealing in that kind of like strategic sphere when you've been looking at getting investment into the Northeast, but also at this particular time, obviously we cannot talk, we're in that pre-election period, about specific politics, but it does determine the future of the industry. As the manifestos are coming out this week, that will see where the whole industry goes when it comes to the UK's competitiveness.
Oh, absolutely. And part of the work that we've done to develop Nest has required significant work at national level on national politics with Whitehall. But it's also required strong local support. So I think I can talk a little bit more about the local support that we've had. So we had a letter of support from the 7 councils in the Northeast to support our bid into UK Space Agency for Nest, which is almost unheard of, to get 7 political leaders of your local councils all on the same page at the same time, talking about the local space economy. And that's how important this is to the Northeast, to develop this particular sector. We're now moving into a new mayoral authority, and the politics in that is a completely different set of politics, which is also going to be fascinating to navigate through, and interacting with these different groups of politicians to support primes and SMEs into these regions has been an eye-opening learning experience. Coming into the funding streams, what's really important, though, is the different types of funding that we can actually access to support particularly SMEs by being a university and by working with primes in a university setting. So we're not always solely dependent upon the contract that comes through. We can do blue sky research with SMEs and primes, and we can drive funding through UK Space Agency and other funders. And that funding has very, very different constraints applied to it, with very different delivery times and opportunities to do some really interesting things. So I think the beauty of developing the sector in collaboration between academia, the primes and SMEs is it just opens many, many more doors and gives us opportunities to work on technology that might not be ready for launch today, but could be so advanced that it's what we need for launch in 10 years' time. And having that strategic oversight and being able to work with the politicians on that is really critical to what we need to do to develop the ecosystem.
And it's communicating to those different parts as well, because as we all know, you have ministers who are taking on a completely different set of papers, sometimes year to year, and they've suddenly got to develop this expertise in this field and know what it's all about. You're there as an academic trying to deal with peer-reviewed papers that could go on for many decades, trying to get all of that checked in place. You've got the SMEs and your need to adjust often month by month, and make sure you've got everybody paid, and then you've got the primes looking at that global market. This is extraordinarily complex. And for you, I mean, Ron, you're dealing with things in various countries. How do you piece that together, working with the primes, when you've got your foot in a lot of camps?
Sure, yeah. I think the diversification that we've already kind of covered, we want to diversify in programs, we try to diversify in markets, and we see that supported, as has already been spoken to, and it supports us not only innovating and finding unique solutions that then can cross over oftentimes. And so when we're bringing that disruptive technology to bear to a prime, it's something that we've often started in a different segment, and then we're building on it and developing it even further. And that's risk mitigation for them. It's a risk mitigation for us. You know, we see it as something, it's close to something we already know. They see it as something we've tried because it's close enough, and we can move forward and put that into a program. You know, something that also helps, we've talked about how there is complexity when it comes to an SME working with the primes, but there's part of that complexity really comes from, we want to be as close to the engineering teams as possible. In fact, you know, our efforts are to try to be an extension of their engineering capability, because that allows trade-offs to be optimized in ways that you can't do otherwise. But on the flip side, a lot of this is competitive, so there has to be some arm's length aspects to it so that there can be appropriate checks and balances for competition. So there's a natural tension that we try to always combat through that technology and the diversification of the technology and the portfolio to keep the business healthy and strong, regardless of what headwinds may hit the business. You know, you get an opportunity like we're dealing with right now in space, and there's a tailwind, and there's a lot of opportunity. I mean, it's a great situation for collaboration because everyone can get a piece of a very large pie. So.
Well, seeing the nodding heads here, it sounds like your tactics, your strategy is very much appreciated, I think, on both sides. Can I ask you about your contracts? How big was it? How many pages was your procurement contract, the last one?
I'll say the primes can be smaller than straight from the government, so that can be over 100 pages, but the primes are probably in the 60 page.
60 page. Somebody we were talking to the other day, Filtronic actually in the Northeast, had said, oh, I've got this contract that I got with SpaceX, 6 to 7 pages, single digits. And his call was like, why can't everybody do this? What is going on? Because obviously these guys, have you got time to be reading 100? No. Look at David, no.
I obviously scan them and make sure that there's nothing jumping off the page, but I certainly don't spend hours going through small print.
Yes.
It's dangerous, by the way. You should read them, but time dictates, you know.
What would you say, Martin? Why are they so big?
There's a clear reason for this. SpaceX are the customer and the prime. So they're taking a risk at both levels in one go. They've been very smart in the marketplace. They've actually gone around and spoken to a lot of companies around the world already working in the space sector and going, what do you do? Who do you make it for? And how many do you sell? And their qualification process is, we'll have it. Because the rest of the industry has already put a lot of the effort into verifying those products and buying them. And it's a good strategy. But also, I think one of the things that we've all got to better understand is there's always an end customer. And end customers are very demanding. It doesn't matter whether it's a government, whether it's an institute, or whether it's actually a commercial organisation. They're actually very demanding, and they're probably spending huge sums, hundreds of millions. For some of them, it's all the big satellites. And they need to get a return on that. And more importantly, at the moment, we can't go and fix them. So they have got to actually work. So a lot of the size of the contracts If you think 60 is big, you should have a look at some of the ones we get from some of our customers. I think you could probably add another 0 on the end of it. But it flows down from that. And I think someone mentioned earlier, especially within governments, they're becoming less risk averse at the moment. So that just means the size of the contract gets a little bit bigger every time. And more requirements actually get flown down to you. But we in the industry have to recognise that. We're here because a customer's spending their money with us and within the supply chain and all our partners to actually buy a product that's going to probably deliver a service which they've actually got a business case against for the next 10, 15 years. So we're all very customer driven, and I'm not sure we always appreciate that. It's not just the primes that make the contracts this big. Sometimes we do make them a bit smaller, but often we're following the customer.
Charlie, just pulling on your theme earlier about politics, I mean, some of these contracts, they flow these requirements down because they're driven by politics themselves. So things like customers now want to know the heritage of every single widget that of where it's come from. They want to know it's not from China. They want to know that their supply chains are clean and they have that transparency. So we have to go through this process, which is, as Martin was saying, that is what our end customers are demanding. And it could be other areas of slave labour or things like that. These are all political in some sense, but that's what's being driven down into our contracts. You would argue it's the right thing to do, but we have to be aware of that. And that's why we as primes might feel so demanding, because we ask for all of these things. We ask for your good standing, your insurances, your accreditations. It's got to work in space. You've got to have got through your ISO accreditations, etc. And those other areas that the customers are looking for, and that's just part of doing business with these customers.
Does that make it increasingly difficult for SMEs, though, to tick all those boxes? I mean, when it comes down to getting these deals, you could be potentially asking a company, do all of these things, but I also need you at the very same time to be doing this, and they can't tick that box.
It's burdensome, but it's required, and then customers and then suppliers have a choice. I'm completely separate market. I bumped into a friend of mine in a train who worked. I don't mention the word HS2, but he has contracts on HS2. He's a micro SME. There are 11 people in the company, and he provides environmental services. He has one guy in the company just dealing with all the levels of accreditation that are needed to get a government subcontract. It goes through a large construction firm, but it's lucrative for him.
But does it stop him being innovative?
No.
Because that money is then being ploughed into that.
No, because he makes it, because he's one of the very few companies that offer that service in, and he can afford to, what is essentially described as just a tick box exercise, but it's what his customers want, because the government customer is driving that through. So companies have a choice in that sense, that do they take that, and once he's got it, it becomes a bit of a competitive advantage, because the barriers to entry become harder for other companies. But it's a choice.
Is it much of a choice, David and Ron?
Well, when we first started working in the sector, and it was, this is equipment we manufacture for other sectors pretty much without all of the contracts. And I do go back to the example I made before. It could have easily gone against us with this contract because they did specify a particular protocol. But had they not written it had to be the same as that, we would have been in serious trouble. So, reading the contracts, however long they are, is really important. But don't do as I say, do as I do, if you know what I mean.
Ron, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think the SMEs need to go in eyes wide open that this is a requirement. And so, can they find a way? We've had experiences, though, as different brands that we have in MPG have stepped up into these domains where the primes are also partners. We often talk about that and like to throw the term around, but they can separate themselves also as primes when they actually come in and help explain a good way to do that. Explain where you might be missing the mark. Explain that, hey, you're close here, tweak this. So you're not doing it from scratch. And when you can find that relationship and build on that relationship, it really does help you get across that chasm and get into the market, satisfy the requirement, make it not as obtrusive as it might be if you tried to do it by yourself, ground up. And the primes can be very helpful in those regards when you have that relationship in place. And you're not operating just as, this is a transactional, we're not going to talk about it kind of relationship.
Because it makes sense to be like that. Everybody wins, surely.
It does, and certainly help is at hand here, and it's not just the primes. Make UK. There is help at hand navigating your way through this. So the trade bodies, particularly, are very competent at helping companies. So if you're interested in going into the market, absolutely eyes wide open. Get help from the trade bodies, Make UK, the Space Agency, UK Space, all those ADS, all those entities will help you through that navigational process.
I'm going to run through some quick fire questions, okay? This one from Martin and Ben. Oh, to Martin and Ben, sorry. How many SMEs are in your supply chains? What percentage of your annual spend is with SMEs? Do you have a target spend with SMEs? Ben, I think you've got like 310.
Okay, so the latest information I have, we don't have a target. So last year we spent £2.3 billion in the UK market. 1,100 companies are in our supply chain. 61% of those companies are SMEs. And we sustain about 24,000 jobs.
In the UK?
In the UK.
I'll be a bit more specific and just talk about space rather than the corporate level, because if I bring Airbus commercial aircraft in, the numbers get silly. So I do monitor. I monitor all our spend. I also report back to the government on an annual basis. So within the UK, Airbus Defence and Space work with 2,000 approved suppliers. 900 of them are actually SMEs. Now, I must admit, I've got a bit of a broader view on the definition of an SME in the space. If you're working and you're delivering goods, services and supporting a company that's actually in the space sector manufacturing solutions, then you're in space. Yeah, I'll give an example. One of our most important space companies is the company that actually keep all the clothing in the clean room clean. Because without them, the clean room's closed. And we can't actually do our assembly, integration and test. They don't think of themselves as a space company, but I do, because we can't work without you. And I think there's more space companies in this country, or there's more companies working within the space sector than probably the catapults currently actually know. I say, so 2,000 approved suppliers, 900 SMEs, sorry, direct spend within the space sector about 300 million every year. Of which about 100 million actually goes to UK SMEs. And
do you have a target? Lockheed Martin Space don't?
No, we don't have a target, because quite often each program is actually different. And I'm afraid you just cannot buy everything you need from the UK. As broad as the supply chain is, there's a lot of technologies and equipment just not available in the supply chain. So we do have to use the global supply chain, but we do try, and it's one of my pet subjects actually, is pushing the programs, etc. And my own procurement team, especially when we're doing national programs, spending taxpayer money, is to try and actually maximise UK content. But we are constrained by what's actually available.
Thank you, Graham. How difficult is it for SMEs to get onto the approved suppliers list for the primes? I'm going to go to you two. How difficult, on a, I don't know, rating of 1 to 10, 10 being the most difficult, getting onto that suppliers list, where would you say?
We were quite fortunate, because we actually had a customer who was a primary supplier to an aerospace company. And they'd been an old customer, so when they wanted this device, they came to us. And when the the aerospace company saw it. They said, we want one. And so that's basically how we got on it. So we kind of got on by default, if you know what I mean. But we
A helping hand.
yeah,
Not default, you should have been there.
we've subsequently gone on to do a lot of other different things. So.
Okay, so yours was a cheat. 1 to 10, how difficult?
I would probably place it in a 5-ish range.
Okay.
It wasn't actually that difficult because we had the differentiated technology that they were after, so there was interest. And then again, our experience has been, while it's not easy, so it's not a 1 or a 2, there was partnership there to get us to the ability to be compliant and be on their approved supplier list. So yeah, I think it was a middle of the road. It wasn't a behemoth task that was just insurmountable. It was something very, very doable. But it takes diligence, it takes rigor, and they hold you accountable. So it's definitely not easy either.
It's that kind of business acumen, isn't it, that you're wanting to kind of encourage, John? I think that sense of bringing those parts together.
Yes, and bringing that together for the benefit of everybody involved in that supply chain and the prime as well. And also having the primes able to help navigate some of the really complex elements around the internationalization of the space sector in particular. So, a component that might be being manufactured in a small factory in the Northeast might also be being used in Australia or the US, and seeing that overarching geopolitics and how to deal with that export supply chain abroad and deal with the regulations of other countries is also something that we can only do with companies who understand that, and that helps bring a lot of that together.
It's having that experience and that expertise. And do you think then that just, does it have that snowball effect? So for example, you have a prime moving into one region, and then the companies adapt, and suddenly everybody's like, they get it now. We can keep going with it.
Yes, and I think the critical mass really can help. And the forecast is for the Northeast that we'll need to train another 9,000 people to work in the space industry over the next 5 years. And we sort of say, it's a little of a joke, but we say we used to build ships on the Tyne. With the help of the primes, we're now going to build spaceships. And we need the primes and the SMEs to help us do that. That future piece can only be done in collaboration.
David?
I think from a small business perspective, it is very daunting when you look at these companies and you think, how the heck am I going to do this? And we found it with the NHS. It's like looking at Mount Everest. How do you navigate this obstacle in your way? And we actually did it, guys, by attending a lot of small events and getting to know people and asking the right questions. And then slowly but surely you pick your way through it. And you're right, it was about 5 years before we actually got our first inquiry. During that time, we were doing all of the development work, and so we were able to ask the right questions about what we needed to do, because basically we could have gone around in circles for the next 20 years. So I do think attending forums and getting to meet the likes of these guys here, which is why I'm here today, by the way.
I think there is an awful lot that can be gained from that face-to-face contact that doesn't come out in an email chain. There is something here from Graham saying, are there ways of circumventing the usual supplier criteria to be able to supply directly to primes? Or are there just investment routes?
Can I answer that one?
Yeah, go.
These guys and others have rules that they will bend on occasion if the SME has something to offer that nobody else can offer. At the end of the day, the business has to be done, and we can't be rigid to the point whereby it doesn't happen because we're not following a certain criteria. So,
would that be a fair point?
I'd give a slightly different take on that. This is space, and it's a very exacting environment and very exacting technologies. And where we go with this, first of all, we don't onboard suppliers unless there's a very good chance they're going to win the contract. So we will put them through the RFP process to get the down select. We definitely do some governance and due diligence early on to make sure that they are approvable. But we won't ask them to jump through the hoops and fill all the forms in until they actually get probably down to the last two in the selection and go, right, now there's a very good chance you're going to get this. We'll ask you to actually complete the process. What we can also do, though, what we do a thing we call an early scan, assessment capability scans of particularly the SMEs, and actually come and go, yeah, we do like what you've got, but actual fact, as a business, you need to probably develop your maturity with the technology. And especially one of the areas that we do find with the SMEs is they tend to struggle with the industrial maturity. Very, very good at the technical bit, but actually the repeatability product, because within space, there's always that in the contract, every product's got to be identical to the last one. But we can help with that by early on. If you're a great technologist, but you maybe need some help with the industrial side, we can actually send in a supply development management team. They've been doing it for many years. They can carry out an assessment, sit down with the SME, with the supplier, and go, right, these are the areas we think you need to strengthen, and we'll help you do it. And we'll sit down with them and we'll actually put a plan together with them. We'll give them guidance on it. We will actually go back and put then the supply chain quality manager in with them to help them do that development and grow. Because we, as you said, we want the technology. So we need to help you get to the point where you can actually provide what we need. So it is a collaboration.
It is that proactive nature you were talking about then, Ron.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would add to what Martin's saying is that it depends on the type of contract and maybe the technology readiness level that the contract's associated with. There can be more flexibility when it's an early engineering model, or you're just proof of concept, or some early technology readiness level that you're obtaining. When it gets into production, the I's have to be dotted and the T's have to be crossed.
Paul had asked about contracts. I think must have some delving into a SpaceX contract that's 10 pages long, so I hope we've answered the question on that. This is from Andy. If an SME is sold into a prime, but in small quantities, how best to increase the opportunities? Is it via end users across multiple sites or through procurement? Anybody to pick up on that?
I'll pick it up from the Airbus point of view. So we actually run our procurement on commodities, and we've got about 270 commodity managers. We've actually brought one of them has come here with us today. They lead their commodities globally. So quite often I talk to the suppliers, do you know who your commodity manager is? Yes. I mean, they're the person you need to keep talking to, because they understand the global requirement in Airbus Defence and Space Systems. Because I know not everybody's organised that way, but that's the way we are organised. But it is important, I think, for the SMEs to understand who is the contact in the business that's got that broader business view. But what I would also say, though, what we really need is to develop these capabilities, the technologies and the equipments, but then the supplier, the partner, needs to go and export them. Because we need resilient supply chains. And that doesn't mean waiting for Airbus to come back every 5 years and buy another two. Because you'd probably lost the skills. People would have actually moved on in that. So I think it's about development. It's about delivering into that program. Then I'd really, especially in the UK, because exports haven't grown very much in the space sector in the last 10 years, I'd really like to see more of the SMEs exporting the technologies and the equipments they've developed. So we need to actually look at about why aren't we doing it? Are we competitive actually on the global market? Or is it maybe we're not trying hard enough? I don't know.
Why? I think that's a great question. Why aren't we exporting enough, do you think, John?
I think there's a huge amount of competition in the sector. There's a huge amount of difficulty in moving up the TRL levels to get to launch and parts of engineering that are ready for space. And Nest, we're desperately trying to fix some of that by allowing SMEs access to space readiness testing facilities, and that's going to be absolutely critical, we hope, to providing more technology that is space ready, because that helps with your direct export. But also, I sort of mentioned the geopolitics of space, and it's absolutely clear that when we cross over into this dual-use technologies between the defence element and the civil element, that some of this becomes much more complex. And, you know, particularly the US and some of the other the large companies that have big space sectors have very, very well developed policies around space and what they as countries want to do. The UK doesn't have the same space policy at a national level. And I think that perhaps has, over the last few decades, held back some of our most innovative technologists in developing technology, when it isn't clear what we as a country are going to try and do in space over the next 20 to 30 years. And not touching on the politics, but I do hope that as we move through July, that we will have some vision for the future about where space sits within the national zeitgeist, where we want to be in the future, and that will help drive those technological developments for the UK space industry, but also help us work out where we fit internationally within that broader space sector.
At the risk of having a couple of minutes left on the clock and throwing a contentious issue in at this late stage, but I can't not. You've mentioned dual use here. Because of the sensitive geopolitical situation we're in at the moment, although we're talking about civil contracts, also we have defence companies here. Does that worry you as SMEs when you're dealing with another potential sector and your attractiveness then to other clients? I know that defence is getting reframed as security, but
no, not really. But we've already bumped into this dual-use scenario because our equipment could be used to clean guns, for example, as well as other applications. It can be a bit daunting, I have to be honest. But going forward, it's just another hurdle you have to jump over, unfortunately. And if you focus too much on it, you won't get anywhere. There's plenty of opportunity, you know.
What would you say to that, Ron?
No, I wouldn't say that it's much of a concern. I mean, I think it does have implications from an import-export standpoint, but beyond making sure that you're being aware of those and adhering to those, I don't think that it's, from a business side, I don't think there's much of a concern. It's actually kind of an opportunity.
Oh, would you guys agree?
I think it depends which way you actually look at it. So dual-use technologies, I think, is actually great because it also adds to the sustainability, the resilience of the company. So if you can develop a technology in one sector and sell it into the others, you've actually got that business growth that goes with it as well. We do understand the defence market is becoming difficult in the UK, and that's primarily because SMEs struggle to get finance, because defence at the moment is actually seen as unacceptable to a lot of the shareholders. And we do have plenty of reports and instances where defence companies, that are also space companies, but are dual use, work in the medical industry as well, but because they do some defence, they've gone to the bank to get an investment, and the banks turned around and said no. I'll give an example with a company we actually use in space. It's been in defence and space for about 10 years, and a new young guy come in to do all their social media and that, totally redone their website, put on the website the fact they were a defence and space company. 2 days later, the bank manager phoned up and went, "Get it off. Our shareholders don't want to know you're working in defence." It's a challenge.
I think it's something we have to address nationally for it. The benefits of taking some of this technology, we have to have resilience. And increasingly, you know, as it was talked about yesterday, more and more of our society today is driven by space products and space itself. And that leaves us vulnerable. And sometimes some of the type of products that you've got in the military space market will become increasingly required for the civilian space market just to protect our way of life. So we're going to have to get over this idea that that there's a boundary here that, oh, you work with a defence company, because fundamentally this is going to be part of our national security. If we want to maintain our way of life, we've got to get over this side of things. And I think that debate absolutely needs to be opened up and challenged by some of these organisations that they think defence is bad. It's a difficult world, outside of our shores at the moment. And, we have to sort of look at Ukraine and what's going on in Eastern Europe to see quite what is going on.
But arguably, you would be able to hold such a hard line because there you are representing Lockheed Martin Space, an arm of this wider organisation, whereas SMEs might not have that luxury.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's hard, and I'm very sad to hear that story. I mean, it is terrible, and it will utterly do damage to us as a society if we maintain that stand. We have to get this debate more open and explain why. We've got to get more on the front foot on this one to explain why this is important. I mean, we're driving, just as Lockheed Martin, our traditional markets are changing, and increasingly we're having new relationships with companies like John Deere. We're moving into, because they require the type of resiliency and the services and products that we offer, they're now demanding it in the agricultural domain. And whether you look at finance, transportation, mobile communications, all these markets are increasingly rely on space communications, and they will increasingly rely on space communications as they go forward, and they have to be resilient. And the military space market is a way to start to deliver resiliency for those commercial markets.
And that list of
so
sectors...
I'm on a hobby horse here, I tell you.
I'm glad I dropped that in so late.
Thank you, yeah.
But I think you listed a load of sectors there, and they're the very opportunities that you're talking about, that for this industry. We're going to have to leave it there, because as you've probably heard, the catering is kind of pouring in, and your phone's already gone off. I can't believe you left that on this stage. Shocking. Thank you. Thank you for all of your questions. You guys are going to be here throughout the day, aren't you? So, and you're always up for a chat. So this is you can hear the hubbub. That's how this day should work. We've got a lot more to come on this main stage. There is actually going to be a completely different setup coming up, because you've got your zone sessions keeping going, but at 12:30, so a very quick turnaround here, is going to be a space showcase. So we've got 6 brilliant businesses in the space sector, and they're going to be, kind of like a speed dating thing. They're going to be here, followed by a panel, I'll be back here at 2, on raising finance, where I'll pick up on... it's as if it was planned. I'll pick up on a lot of this stuff that we've talked about today. And also, please keep going to those exhibition stands. The pop-up planetarium, it's your last chances for the next few hours, so grab your free tickets from reception. But first of all, can we thank very much our panel? We have Martin Lee of Airbus, Ben Shaw of Lockheed Martin Space, David Jones of Alpha Sonics, Ron Ruppersberg of MPG, and Professor John Woodward of Northumbria University. Thank you for being at Ignite Space 2024.